Now that we're 3 weeks into March, we want to be well on our way to having our gardens cleaned up for the new year. If you haven't done so already, it's a good idea to cut back all of your ornamental grasses and your perennials. That is, removing all of last year's growth to make way for this year's growth. Well, we still have a few things we need to get cleaned up here in our garden, like this clump of morning light miscanthus here at the corner of our studio barn. So I'm just gonna take my head shears here and cut off all of last year's growth. Cut away all of these old leaves and stems. Make way for those fresh new clumps of foliage that will come out from the crown of the plant. It won't take any time at all before we have all that new foliage here in the garden, replacing all this brown foliage. This will all be good material for our compost pile. Be sure and mix in some green materials to help it break down quick enough. But I like to cut back the grasses to about 1/4 of the height that they were growing in the garden. And I like to kind of mound the clump as well. It just gives a good support to all those new leaves that come out of the center. And again, about 1/4 of the height that the plant was growing. Now I know some gardeners who like to get really ambitious and cut back their ornamental grasses with a chainsaw or some power hedge trimmers. If you want to try that, before you do, it's a good idea to get some sort of twine and to cinch up the grass so it holds together very well before you cut that off. I've seen people try to do it without cinching the grasses up, and the chainsaw gets kind of clogged up with all those loose blades of grass. Well, if you want to dig up and move any of your ornamental grasses, you could do that at this time of the year, or split those up and divide them. Maybe give a few to your neighbors, or just plant them in other parts of your garden. You definitely do that this time of the year. Like I said, the perennials also need the tops cut off of them. So these Russian sage here also need a good spring haircut. But again, here with my head shears, I'm just gonna cut those back. Now, Russian sage is actually somewhat of a sub-shrub type plant. So it will have live stems that overwinter, and we'll get some buds breaking way up in the upper parts of the plant. But in order to keep the plant at a nice size, a little bit smaller, more compact height, I'm going to cut it down to about 6 to 8 inches. That way we can have a nice, compact perennial here in our garden. But, just come in, cut these back. Doesn't take much time at all, and really gives the garden a fresh, clean look when they start to leaf out and flower. Now, any of your fall blooming perennials like goldenrods or asters can be dug and divided at this time. And you could also dig and divide any spring blooming perennials or summer blooming perennials at this time, but remember, they probably will not flower this year. Well, good luck continuing with the cleanup of your garden. The last time our show aired, we were cutting back the tops on our asparagus planting. We told you about how when we removed those, it would allow the sunlight to get down there to the ground and cause those plants to start growing. Well, there's another technique you could employ to get your asparagus spears to come out of the ground even quicker, and all you need to do it is some fresh green compost and some sort of cylinder or bottomless container, like maybe a bottomless 5-gallon bucket, or a wooden keg without a bottom, or maybe even a whiskey barrel that's had the bottom knocked out of it. Well, we're going to use these old rusty tubs that have had the bottom rusted out of those. You may recognize these from last year. We grew our potatoes in these tubs in our vegetable garden. If you remember, we just set the tub on the ground, we took the piece of seed potato, put it right on the surface of the soil, and then we just kept adding compost as those stems grew till we had a tub full of compost, and later on we had a tub full of potatoes. Worked very well. Well, they haven't completely rusted away, so we're going to use them again to try to heat up our asparagus. Well, right here you can see where we've cut off all the stems a little bit earlier. We're just going to place this tub over that portion of ground there. And then we're going to take the green compost and I'm going to start adding it to the outside of the tub. Now this is definitely green compost. You can see all that green material in there. And it's not aged compost like we used with our potatoes last year. And we're not going to put it inside the tub because, again, we want that soil inside here to get the benefit of all that sunlight, heating that up. And we also don't want the green compost to come into contact with any of the emerging spears, because we could get some burning of those spears. But I'm just going to keep adding this to the outside of the tub, and you can see I'm piling it up pretty thick there, at least about 8 to 10 inches. And of course, when the microorganisms work on all this to break down that organic matter, they generate a lot of heat, and we're attempting to harvest that energy that the microbes are generating and use that heat to heat up the ground around this tub and hopefully get those spears to start coming out of the ground a little bit sooner. On another note, the asparagus spears, as they start coming out of the ground from your clumps, will generally start to decline if you have a planting that's about 15 years old or older. And if this is something that's happening in your garden, you might think about replanting your asparagus with some fresh, new, vigorous crowns. And just in general, asparagus plantings will start to decline after about 12 to 15 years. So if you want to stay well stocked in asparagus, plow up your old 15-year-old or older asparagus fields if they're not producing like they ought to be. And if you just can't wait, you want to get those asparagus spears as soon as possible, you might try adding some fresh green compost around the site.